Well, joining me now from London is Denis MacShane. He's the UK's former EU minister and author of the book Brexit, No Exit, How in the End Britain Won't Leave Europe. In Strasbourg, we have Stephen Woolfe. He's a member of the European Parliament for North West England and was once tipped to take over as leader of UKIP. And in Birmingham, we have Conservative Party activist Ali Fazel. Gentlemen, thanks so much for joining us on the Newsmakers once again. Stephen Woolfe, let me start with you. Did the House make the right decision to reject Theresa May's deal with the Europeans?
Absolutely. This was a deal that was not acceptable to leavers like myself, who believed that we should have a truly independent nation state capable of taking control of all our laws and negotiating trade deals with the rest of the world. And of course, it was deeply opposed by those on the Remain side because it didn't satisfy their reasons for being in the European Union, which is full membership of the single market, the customs union, and being part of a club that they feel comfortable and safe with in making decisions on our behalf.
So, Stephen, even though we are stepping into unknown territory and possibly much more chaos, was it worth it?
Absolutely. I think it had to be made clear to the Prime Minister that this withdrawal agreement was a nonsense from the start. She should have made a decision early on to tell the European Union that we would have gone to a WTO deal on a specific date, and then we could have worked towards a free trade arrangement. Instead, she tried to cobble together a halfway house deal that doesn't satisfy either side. And what she's done in the process, and this is the real danger to our British politics now, is that she has created the biggest constitutional crisis since the English Civil War. We now have the equivalent of Roundheads against Cavaliers. We have brought out one of the deepest, nasty elements of our society in England, which is snobbishness. It's a way of looking down on people that voted. And we have a battle between Parliament and those voters, the constitutional issue there.
Denis MacShane, did she create the constitutional crisis or did Brexit create the constitutional crisis?
Both. I mean, clearly what we saw last night is the beginning of a giant fight between parliamentary democracy and the democracy. It's democracy of plebiscites. And plebiscites, one of the basis of lies. It's great to be on TRT because one of the big lies 30 months ago was that 85 million Turks were about to enter the European Union and come to England. Now, anybody in Turkey will know that's a lie, but we were told that. But what we now have is a fight between a parliament that doesn't want to destroy the economy, doesn't want to damage jobs, wants to keep Britain an open, tolerant nation, and a plebiscite vote, which is to cut Britain off, amputate it from Europe, tell Europeans they're not welcome here, bring British expats back from Europe. And in a sense, those two can't really be reconciled. And she, the Prime Minister, since day one of entering Downing Street, has only ever sided with the language of anti-Europeanism. If you're a believer in Europe, then you're a citizen of nowhere. If you're a European working here, you're a queue jumper. This is all the ugly language of dislike of Europeans, and in the sense she got a comeuppance yesterday. I don't know how the heck she gets out of this.
And Denis MacShane, for you, the solution is no Brexit.
Well, I think the solution is that we should ask the British people. I trust the people. They came to one decision 30 months ago, I believe based on lies, on erroneous information. Let's leave that to one side. We now have a lot of new facts. We really understand the implications and the damage to Britain's standing, status and economy if we amputate ourselves from Europe. We've also got a lot of new voters. A lot of younger voters have joined the electoral rolls who are very, very concerned about being denied their right to work and retire and live in Europe. So I just say, let us trust the people.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned young, new voters. Ali Fazel is our youngest panelist on the show here. And Ali, it's quite rare, and I mean this not disrespectfully, but it's quite rare to have a very young person who's a conservative on this show or anywhere else. You know, the joke is that you're the one conservative who skipped the phase of being a Marxist or a leftist in his teens and 20s and went straight to being a conservative, right? Tell me where you stand on this as a young Tory activist.
Thank you, Imran. Thanks for having me on the show again. And I have to say, it's not necessarily rare to be a young Conservative. We actually had more young people at the Conservative Party conference this year than Labour did at their conference, so we're definitely not rare. But where I stand on this is that the British people had their say, They voted to leave, and Parliament has to enact that. We have to leave the European Union. But that doesn't mean leaving at any cost. We have to make sure that we leave sensibly, not with a no-deal Brexit, but with one that protects jobs and the economy. And it was a shame to see Theresa May's deal not get through Parliament. I think it was a compromise. You're never going to please everybody. She was trying to bring together Leave and Remain, and it's a shame that MPs didn't support that. When you have a party with Anna Soubry and Jacob Rees-Mogg in it at the same time, you're never going to find an agreement where both can agree. And so it was a shame to see it voted down, and I think where we go from here is what MPs like Nick Bowles and Nicky Morgan and Oliver Letwin have suggested. The government has 3 weeks till the first week of March to go and to have a look at what Plan B could be. They then come back, present that to Parliament. If Parliament is happy with that, then fantastic, we move ahead with that plan. If not, then control of the Brexit process goes on to the Liaison Committee, which is the most senior committee in the House of Commons, and they take control of the process. They can then make amendments, form a new deal, and get a deal where everybody can actually agree, or at least majority of the MPs.
So, Ali, I want to bring in Stephen Woolfe. So, Stephen Woolfe, here you have a young Tory activist going, OK, it's not the greatest deal, but it's a deal and it's a compromise. Let's just get on with it now. Let's make the most of it. Why are you guys so heavily against it?
Because you're quite right. He said that the British people voted to leave, and that's an interesting point that, if I can go back to what Denis had said, Denis said, I really oppose plebiscites. They're really not a great idea, but now he wants to have a third referendum, the so-called losers vote referendum, which is indeed a plebiscite. But I'm going to trust that plebiscite if we can win. The key point about this is that we asked to leave the European Union, and everybody accepts that Theresa May's withdrawal deal does not leave the European Union. Of course, we do leave the institutions of the European Union. I lose my job as an MEP. You lose the Commission. You're not on the European Courts of Justice. But Theresa May's deal makes sure that the UK is bound by all European laws. The deal also suggests that we have the European Courts of Justice in a vast swathe of areas under our control. And the Attorney General in the debate yesterday, our most senior lawyer in the country and for the government, said we should be happy that we're returning 40% of our laws in agriculture and fisheries back to the UK. How can getting back control of 40% of our laws mean Brexit and taking control? That is why we're opposed to it. We're still tied into the European Union. Rule takers, not rule makers.
And Stephen, even though Parliament rejected the deal, the Europeans don't seem to be interested in a renegotiation. So what's going to happen? You just drop out and that's that? Deal with the consequences?
No, absolutely. I'm here in the European Parliament. I've been talking to a wide variety of people, from Mr. Verhofstadt, who leads ALDE, to Marcus Faber, who's chairman of the economic committees. All of them now still would like to see Britain remain in the European Union. That is their clear position. But there is a slight divide. There are those who say that they are not going to change this withdrawal agreement at all. That was the deal put on the table. Britain should accept it. But there is a deep concern that at the end of March, if we do not accept that deal, if Parliament in the UK doesn't accept the withdrawal agreement, they go to the WTO scenario, which they recognise fully is very damaging to European economies, particularly Holland, particularly Ireland. And as you heard from Macron in his speech this morning, there would be an enormous battle with France over fishing rights, because he knows that their country loses it, but he would want to challenge it.
Right. Denis MacShane, just a little bit of housekeeping domestically before we look at the bigger picture again. And it's, you know, this thing kind of like expands and contracts as we discuss it. A no confidence vote. Is she going to survive it?
Yes, the Conservatives will all come running back around Mother this evening. They had their great outing yesterday. They had an outing before Christmas, where they had, just inside the Conservative Party, a vote of no confidence, and 117 Tory MPs voted against her, and 118 Tory MPs voted against her yesterday. I assume they're the same people. She'll survive that. I mean, it really is weird to anybody who knows and loves British parliamentary history, the idea that a Prime Minister who suffered a 230 majority defeat, never before happened, just toddles along and poddles along as if nothing's changed, is really very, very weird indeed. Yep, she'll be there tomorrow. And her job, I slightly agree with Ali in Birmingham, is to find a way out. There are ways out. She could have proposed those 2.5 years ago. It's to say follow the Norway option. So we politically leave the EU. We're an independent sovereign state, but we still keep all the economic contacts and ties. The WTO line is silly. It takes a year or 2 years to negotiate going back into the WTO. And Russia and all of our friendly countries have made very clear they're not going to allow Britain back in on anything other than their terms. So the sensible way forward, if we can't have a second referendum, I prefer Parliament to take full control of this process, would be, as some sensible Conservatives have indicated, though, by the way, Ali, I don't think you'll find the liaison committee, too many chairmen of, that's the committee of all the chairmen of all the big select committees, too many have said we're not touching this at all. It's down to Mrs May. She has to find it from within herself to reverse 2.5 years of being a hard Brexiter and come back into the middle of the picture.
But Stephen, given that she doesn't have the mandate in Parliament, yes, Denis MacShane said she'll probably survive the no confidence vote, but we look at the numbers from last night, 432 to 202. Should she be that person tasked with spearheading this big job now, or is she just a hollow shell of a leader who shouldn't be in the position?
I think she's severely weakened, and I believe she's been severely weakened over the past year and should have gone a long time ago and been replaced by somebody who truly believes in the benefits of Brexit. I mean, there's a lot that Denis says there that I agree with, but there's no way that I could possibly agree that suggests that Theresa May is a hard Brexiteer. She's a Remainer at heart. She has tried to find a way that satisfies the Remain instincts of those who she has around her, whether it's David Lidington or the Letwin, all her closest allies on that. She's tried to satisfy the Remainer attitudes of those in business who would rather be ruled by the European Union regulations than those in the UK. And it's that mistake that she has made fundamentally. Rather than saying, I trust the British people completely, and I follow the Brexit as they wanted, which is WTO followed by a free trade arrangement, she's tried to cobble this together. And sadly, that's where she's got the biggest mistake. But unfortunately, she isn't going anywhere. She'll be here to the very end.
Denis MacShane, tell me why you're shaking your head.
Well, very simply, when I voted, Steve and Ali, we all did, 30 months ago, the WTO wasn't on the ballot paper. Amputating economic links weren't on the ballot paper. Requiring all the British citizens in Europe to possibly have to come own wasn't on the ballot paper. It was leave or remain. And we were told by people like Boris Johnson and David Davis and others that there'd be no problems. Negotiating with the EU would take a matter of a few weeks. I mean, we had the most irresponsible, dishonest political campaign in history. Now, Mrs May, I agree, she isn't a sort of fanatical Brexiteer, but she's used, when you say that Europeans, my friends, living in my country, working and paying taxes, are queue jumpers, and when people who believe that we can support other nations are citizens of nowhere, that's ugly language that I think has distressed an awful lot of people and meant she has very little political support. The way out, though, I do agree with Stephen, I don't think she's going anywhere. She's unbelievably stubborn. And were she to resign, there'd be an election in the Conservative Party, and we'd have an utterly fanatical European hater elected as leader, then presumably Prime Minister, and the crisis would deeply, deeply intensify.
Ali, as a Theresa May supporter, do you want her to continue to soldier on and be stubborn?
Absolutely. And I think you'll find that we have confidence in our Prime Minister. Of course, the deal didn't get through yesterday, but she's made it very clear she's willing to listen to what opposition MPs want. Where I think she did go wrong is that from the very beginning, she should have had a government of national unity. She should have brought together leaders from all the parties and sat down and actually found she should have found an agreement by this point that satisfies everybody's needs in Parliament. And she hasn't done that, but she is now aware that the only way she can get this through Parliament is if she does that. So I'm really hoping she does do that. But I have to go back on what Stephen said about WTO rules. Nobody ever voted to leave the European Union with no deal. Nobody voted.
Yes,
nobody voted for that specific thing, because both campaigns, Remain and Leave, were based on the fact that we would leave with a deal. No one ever said anything about leaving without a deal. Nobody voted to be poor. Nobody voted to lose their jobs.
Not going to be poor.
It would be the worst case scenario, and I think MPs have a responsibility, MPs and MEPs have a responsibility to make sure that doesn't happen, because these are real lives we're talking about.
Stephen?
That is not, I'm sorry, but the very clear point was made to everybody in the election, from the £9 million leaflet that was sent to every house that said, if we leave the European Union, we leave the customs union and the single market. It was made very clear by the Prime Minister, the Prime Minister and the leaders of all parties that you will be leaving the single markets and customs union. And what we said in our campaign was very clear, that you leave those, that means, therefore, you are on WTO, and we seek to have a free trade arrangement. And our belief was a sensible government would have used the 2 years after the referendum to get a free trade arrangement. They've been blocked by Remainers. And Dennis, you cannot just turn around and say there were lies on our side without accepting the lies on yours. The Liberal Democrats have been fined for it. The language used by Remainers that have insulted people, calling them stupid, thick and idiotic for voting to leave, that has been highly divisive in our nation and deeply upsetting from MPs who use it all the time. And the suggestion they didn't know what they're voting for...
Okay, all right.
Finish your point, Stephen, and then Dennis can come in.
To suggest that people didn't know what they're voting for now is patronising beyond belief, and that has created the huge divide that we have in our country today.
Dennis?
No point in rerunning June, May 2016, or the 5, 10, 15 years before it. The biggest single slogan of the campaign was, you will have £350 million a week for the National Health Service on leaving the EU, on voting Brexit.
Good.
Hands up. Any of us, anybody in the world who thinks that was a truthful statement. But let's talk about tomorrow and next week and so on. What's going to happen? Possibly a second referendum. Yes, I'm a parliamentarian. I don't really like plebiscites. I think this plebiscite has it's like a giant tube of super glue that's been squeezed into all political machinery, government machinery, investment decision machinery, and everything's blocked up. And in the sense, a second referendum is the only way of cutting what's called a Gordian knot, I think. Now, I'm not sure what the outcome would be. Steve's side might win it again. Alternatively, we come to moderate, middle-of-the-road arrangements to maintain the economic relationship with the rest of Europe, to say to foreign investors, the 1,000-plus Japanese firms, if you stay in Britain, you can still export to 450 million middle-class consumers. If we go down the hard Brexit road, though, all that comes to a crashing end. So it's very, very tricky times, and it's down to leadership now. The idea MPs are taking back control. I wasn't MP for 20 years. You don't take back control. The people in charge are the party machines. Jeremy Corbyn is just sitting in the deck chair enjoying the Tory mess and chaos and crisis, and he's not prepared to offer much leadership, in my view, and I'm a Labour guy. Theresa May hasn't seen a blind alley she hasn't got up since July 2016. Let's see if this is finally wake-up time for her. I don't know, but it's going to be a very, very difficult period ahead for us.
Let's see. Well, we'll be having more discussions such as this one up until and including March 29th, 2019 and beyond, of course. Whether people were with the, 52% or the 48%, or they were ineligible to vote back then, 2.5 years ago, I guess a lot of people feel that we've hit a point where all the negotiations over the past 2 years have been for nothing. And that's a fascinating and interesting time now in the UK. We'll be keeping a close eye on it. But for the moment, gentlemen, I have to move on. Denis MacShane, Stephen Woolfe and Ali Fazel, thanks so much for joining us.